Hello everyone, this is Lek Archie. Welcome back to Quick Fixes, the deceptively named series where I give a detailed summary, analysis, and final verdict / grade on whatever I'm currently fixated on. And I can't think of a better way to end summer than by making my third video essay. Cause like, what else would I do? Go outside? That's where the bees live! Oh dear god, they figured out doorknobs! The series I'll be talking about today is called Denshattack, and I use the term series loosely as this is a first-of-its-kind indie game that was rolled out mid-July to rave reviews and commercial success. It was developed by undercoders and published by Fireshine Games, with its director David Juan Mondru claiming he got the idea for it while playing with a toy model of a Japanese train and asked his co-workers, what if trains could flip, grind, and do tricks like skateboards? And naturally, him and his team got right onto answering that question in the form of this game. Now, admittedly, I did see some people play the demo up this months before it actually came out, but I didn't think much of it at the time. And even now, I'm a bit reluctant to make a full-length video on it. Because, I mean, come on, while the concept sounds cool, how interesting could a game about trains possibly be? Like, why do I hear adorable boss music playing? So you might be wondering, what exactly is Denshattack? Not just as a game, but also, what the heck does that even mean? Well, for starters, Denshattack is a portmanteau of the Japanese word for train, densha, and the English word attack, and it's an odd but apt description of the game. The story takes place in a post-apocalyptic Japan, which was ravaged by an event known as the climate catastrophe. The rich and the powerful took shelter inside domed cities connected by high-speed rails, while the riffraff were forced to make do and survive the harsh conditions of the wastelands. Our protagonist, Emmy, is a humble delivery girl relegated to life outside the domes, and she frequently has to navigate rusty, turbulent railways just to make ends meet. Along the way, she encounters a train enthusiast named Fernando who sees her crazy skills and tells her she should get into Denshattack, a competitive sport where master train drivers go to battle it out in races, trick-offs, or even literal battles to expand their territory over the Forsaken Land. And Emmy, upon hearing that Train Fight Club is a thing, does what any normal person would do and immediately quits her 9-to-5 so she can perform death-defying stunts for presumably no money at all.
I will not see you Monday!
So yeah, if you couldn't already tell, this game really embraces the overall wackiness of its premise, having a just-go-with-it tone from start to finish. And it really works in its favor. It can be disappointing when a game that has an insane concept doesn't go far enough or takes things so seriously that it sucks out any fun or intrigue. But Denshattack knows the very concept of it is silly, and rather than shying away from that, it quadruples down on it. This game is a rare case of throwing everything at the wall and all of it sticking. But what would a chaotic but in-depth game be without chaotic but in-depth gameplay? Denshattack is categorized as a platformer, which I suppose is true, but that qualifier alone doesn't do it justice in my opinion. You control a train, drifting, jumping, and picking up collectibles and the like until you reach the end of the track. Though the gameplay feels good and fluid once you get the hang of it, there is a bit of a learning curve. And while it is controller recommended, you can also play on mouse and keyboard if you prefer. I can't speak on the fluidity in that scenario since I used an Xbox controller, but even I had to do some remapping to make things easier. For my layout, I kept things mostly the same, only I swapped the brake/drift command from left trigger to right trigger because I was just more accustomed to Mario Kart rules, and I also made the jump button X. Apparently X is supposed to be a jump cancel command, but given that you likely aren't going to cancel a jump unless you're above solid ground, the air stomp works just fine for that, and so doing away with that command wasn't much of a loss. But once you find your rhythm, getting the hang of your train becomes a breeze, and finally figuring out how to chain double-digit trick combos or detour just in time to grab spray cans and photo reels becomes almost too satisfying to describe. And whether you need to adjust your controls or not, the game gives you plenty of time to feel things out. Denshattack eases you into the experience by having you travel to regions where you face off against whichever gang controls the area, and each of them are based off of actual Japanese rebel movements from different decades. You work your way up by taking on the lower gang members while you slowly learn new mechanics that become integral in your journey. And after perfecting your new skills, you get to an epic boss fight where you finally face their leader. That's right, this game about doing skate tricks with trains has boss fights because why wouldn't it? And to say that these are the highlight hardly feels controversial, as while every aspect of Denshattack is oozing with awesome, it feels like the devs were on a mission to see just how many creative boss fights are allowed to put into one game. That Powerpuff Girl looking mech I showed in the intro, that was the first boss. Just when you think you fought the coolest thing you've ever seen in a video game, Denshattack throws you for a loop with another boss fight that's not only completely different, but somehow better than the one that came before it. The variety on display here is nothing short of remarkable, and even after playing the game, I struggled to pick a favorite. And that's because each encounter is such a fresh experience that you'll feel like you just played a different game each time you finish a region. Likewise, the actual level design is surprisingly diverse and intricate. You think train game and your mind probably goes to racing or picking up items as you drive around the track, but levels where you have to complete it in a certain amount of time are actually few and far between. And all collectibles are completely optional, as they just give you an in-game currency for cosmetics and train upgrades. Usually you just have to get to the end of the track to complete a level, but there are also missions where you need to reach a certain trick score, master a new mechanic, or even complete quests. And those missions in particular give you a great amount of freedom, as you can do objectives in any order you want, plus the level is laid out to allow backtracking, which is great if you happen to speed past something. There are also a set number of dares in each level that consist of different tasks, such as performing a certain trick, honking your horn at stuff, or timing your dodges just before disaster strikes. You don't have to do them, of course, but keeping them in mind while you're on the track adds an extra layer of challenge that keeps things fresh. But you can still make significant progress in this game even if you suck at doing tricks, miss items, and not even crashing results in failure. And that's because there's no such thing as a game over in Denshattack. Going off the rails just has your gang cut in telling you not to give up, and you restart right where you left off. Not only does the round not end after you mess up, there's checkpoints out the wazoo, and so you don't even have to start from the beginning. In fact, crashing can be a blessing in disguise, as checkpoints are often set up in a way that gives you a second chance at grabbing a collectible you missed, or even placing you after a section you were struggling with, allowing you to skip it entirely. When I say Denshattack puts fun above all else, I mean it, as the fact that there are no tangible punishments for making mistakes means that your frustration with the game correlates to how much of a perfectionist you are. So if you just focus on doing your best instead of mauling whenever you miss a jump or an item, you'll be fine. And even if you are a perfectionist, you have the option to restart the level from the pause menu, and after finishing a region, you can go back to any mission at your leisure if you want to get something you missed, or even just try for a higher score. So while it can get overwhelming on the track, the overall leniency of the game makes its fast-paced nature much easier to get used to, and the let's have a good time vibes are only reinforced by the OST. Because when I tell you, the music in this game, the music, the music!
Time for one more lap.
While we were all sleeping, Kid Katana Records was out here gathering the damn Avengers of video game OSTs. The amount of sheer talent in here will make you feel like you bought an album with a free game attached. Even the menu music is a certified banger. The menu music, how do you even do that?
Give me something to dance to.
That's all just my long-winded way of saying the game design is a hit on all sixes. It's hard to make any criticisms that wouldn't come across as nitpicking. But as fun as the gameplay is, the story and characters are where Denshattack really shines. Denshattack, as mentioned, is set in a futuristic but highly volatile version of Japan, where wealthy citizens have taken refuge in domed cities built by the Miraido Corporation, represented by typical kawaii mascot Multi the Mole. Miraido is basically a super conglomerate that controls pretty much everything from the railways to the police force, and they even got the Yakuza under their thumb. Despite all the delinquents and rebels you end up fighting, Miraido Corp is unquestionably the actual big bad of the game, and the devs weren't exactly shy about conveying that.
Shikoku was hit really hard by the climate catastrophe. Our engineers are determined it's best to keep this region quarantined and use it for research and development. They are making our life better day by day. So let's send them a big thank you from the safety of our dome. Thank you, Miraido's engineers!
Emi goes on a cross-country tour facing off against the leaders of each region, and in true shonen fashion, they all end up joining her so they can support her quest of becoming the world's greatest Denshattacker. The loading screen even changes over time to show more characters on the train as you recruit them. How adorable is that? And to be fair, I'd probably join Emmy too if I was in this world, because she's so damn likable and energetic that it's hard not to be charmed by her. She got the exact kind of fearlessness and heart needed to be the main character of a game where you drag race trains on skyscrapers, waterfalls, and active volcanoes. Her tendency to pull insane stunts that no one else would even think of is what allows her to overcome any obstacle she faces. But another aspect of Emmy that I love is her willingness to put aside her own interests for the greater good. As she goes about her journey, we constantly see her putting herself in danger and making sacrifices for the sake of helping others or stopping Mirado's influence. For example, when Fernando is teaching Emmy the rail grind mechanic at one of Mirado's factories, she goes from raving about their ramen to being instantly radicalized. The conversation basically goes like this: "Oh man, I sure do love this company's product. You know they've done some pretty unethical stuff, right? Oh, okay, well then, time to commit eco-terrorism." Emmy is just so endearingly unhinged, it's great. And she has a wonderful hype man to keep helping her with her antics as well. Fernando is a Denshattack fanboy who serves as her main exposition giver and is basically the entire catalyst of this game. He's been obsessed with Denshattack ever since he was a kid when he saw a train flying over the cruise ship he was on, and I mean, fair, who wouldn't make their entire life about figuring out what the hell that was. He's actually the son of Peruvian diplomats who were visiting the country on business, but he snuck off to take photos of the trains, and after ordering some takeout, he meets Emmy, info dumps about Denshattack, and now he's flying across Japan documenting gang warfare and corporate corruption in a fanzine he started for fun. Bro struck up one conversation with a cute delivery girl, and now he's a political journalist running from the cops. He is having a day. Not that Fernando minds, of course. He has complete faith in Emmy, and a genuine belief in her is really heartwarming. I found myself liking him a lot as the game went on. He has the vibe of a kid who's never even gotten detention before, but still acknowledges that doing the right thing doesn't always equate to doing the legal thing, and I love him for that. Yoshie also ended up being one of my favorites, but in her case my fondness sprouted for her almost immediately. If you know me, you know that I am a sucker for the Gyaru aesthetic. Heck, I even put one in my own webcomic, so the fact that Yoshie's motif is based around that subculture and so accurately at that had me in a chokehold. Being a Denshattacker doesn't stop her from staying true to fabulousness, as her gang is actually known for redecorating and fixing abandoned tourism sites. Or as Miraido calls it, vandalism. Yoshie is the daughter of wealthy socialites who are pretty cozy with Miraido, as they're implied to be one of their biggest and earliest investors. But Yoshie rebelled against them by not only becoming a Denshattacker, but also an influencer who encouraged girls to break away from the increasingly controlling grip of Miraido Corp and Japan in general. I'm gonna get more into this later, but a lot of time and effort was clearly put into researching the subcultures that each boss hails from, as Yoshie's backstory is almost a one-to-one of how wealthy Japanese girls who were some of the first Gyarus acted, right down to being labeled as an outcast and bad influence for the crime of dyeing her hair fun colors and throwing parties, which are pretty normal things for teenagers to do. But more than that, Yoshie also makes use of her parents' ill-gotten money and exploits her family's connections to not only commission a giant-ass mech, but to redistribute it back to the people in the form of her restoration projects. Eating the rich from the inside, absolute queen behavior. Although Yoshie is defeated at the start, she doesn't just stay on the sidelines. She's very proactive in this story, often teaching Emmy new skills, and she even saves the entire crew at one point in the game. Don't you just love it when hyper-feminine characters aren't relegated to damsel in distress or love interest roles? But moving on to a much less girly girl. Madoka is the second boss of the game, and honestly one of the most intriguing characters here. She's based around the delinquent subtype of Sukeban, and just like with Yoshie, her design and personality sticks very closely to the defining features of it. For those who don't know, the Sukeban were a youth gang subculture from around the 1960s that uniquely consisted only of girls. Ironically, this movement allegedly formed in response to Japanese boy delinquent groups banning their female classmates from joining. And yet, the Sukeban would go on to outlast them. Madoka is a tough-as-nails, no-nonsense kind of gal who even got kicked off of her high school baseball team for constantly losing her temper during games. She would find a more fitting outlet for her anger problems in the form of Denshattack, and like-minded young women with an angst to grind against society started joining her, and thus her gang Deadball was born. Out of the entire cast, Madoka gets a lot of lore regarding her involvement in Denshattack, as we discover she's had beef with nearly every other gang we encounter. She's clashed with Yoshie and beaten her so badly that she never stepped outside her own territory afterwards, and she has history with Yamagata that I wouldn't dare spoil, but girl, complete all the onsen exit dares is my advice. Madoka's toughness isn't just confined to the story, as even gameplay-wise it's conveyed in the fact that she's the only boss who canonically defeats Emmy, and you actually have to go up against her twice. Talk about a second inning. Please don't leave. Shin and Fumihiko are Emi's mechanics and spiritual brothers in Denshattack arms. When we first meet Shin, he takes it upon himself to provide Emi with different trains to ride, which is how you unlock new vehicles. Their gang is much more tightly knit compared to the other regions marked by the whole found family angle that's outlined by Fernando's fanzine. Their level ended up being one of my personal favorites, and I actually quite liked their storyline. You see, Fumihiko was an ace engineer whose ambitious train designs would end up killing a promising young Denshattacker, causing him to run to the mountains in shame. But Shin requests that Emi pull him out of his self-imposed exile by challenging him. And of course it works, just look at that loading screen. Shin and Fumihiko are the closest thing to parental figures any of these kids seem to have, and they're always there to remind Emi of what's important and to be careful on the track, though it doesn't stop them from putting in new death-defying train upgrades if she says please enough. Despite their over-the-top designs and rockabilly motif, these two serve as a surprisingly grounded presence throughout the game. And seeing the orphaned Emi pretty much accept them as family without hesitation is actually very sweet.
This is so fun! Thank you, Uncle!
Uncle?
Yamagata is the leader of Tarantula, which is our Bosuzoku biker gang group of the game. Yamagata, although a Denshattacker, is a lot less focused on expanding his territory or challenging other train drivers. Instead, he and his gang often go head-to-head with Muraido, or more specifically, their task force through vandalizing their structures and leading them on police chases. Yamagata is very much the cool big brother of the group, and he keeps a keen head on his shoulders about his goals of liberating people from the government stronghold. His boss fight is actually sparked by Emi innocently calling their raid fun, but Yamagata doesn't think fighting for basic human rights is something to be made light of. Thankfully, him and Emi come to an understanding after a good old Denshattack battle, which as we know by now, solved every problem. Despite its late introduction, I can honestly say Yamagata is a character who leaves an impression, and it doesn't hurt at all that his region contains some of the best levels in the game. And with all the major characters summed up, I think it's time to get into what makes them so good. Namely, the subcultures all of them came from, and the history behind them, and also how it ties into the themes of the story so perfectly. Denshattack bases its character designs on various Japanese rebel movements from different eras, and this wasn't a random choice. This game is very pro-radical activism, and despite the goofy tone, it doesn't exactly sugarcoat the consequences of late-stage capitalism.
The merciless climate crisis has pushed humanity into air-purifying dome cities. A future not so distant from yours.
Themes of climate change, corporate surveillance, and AI overreach are all covered here, and the heroes of our story are very much against all of those things. In fact, many levels revolve around committing acts of healthy vandalism and thwarting Muraido by literally driving a train through their plans. Seriously, one mission even has you destroying an AI data center. Now, I feel it's necessary to address a viewpoint I see a lot, as Denshattack takes place in Japan. And there's something of a routine knee-jerk reaction of shock among certain Western players whenever a Japanese game focuses on rebelling against unfair systems given the conservative and traditional nature of the country. And while there is truth to Japanese leadership and many of their systems, such as schools and companies prioritizing conformity, I feel that description oversimplifies how nuanced countries actually are. Places with millions or even billions of people who are living there aren't all going to agree or be satisfied with how things are currently running, as social change is often slow by design even in democratic nations. The reality is, the universal human reaction to government failings or political corruption has always been to dissent, and Japanese people are no different regardless of what their culture's stated values are. Moreover, our tendency to associate the country with obedience is a pretty recent development in the grand scheme of things. People have sort of forgotten this, but up until about the 1950s, Japan was known as a warmongering nation that often broke rules and treaties in the name of conquest. And even within the military framework, we can see gasp at their willingness to override unfit leadership within their ranks via coups and assassination attempts. And yet you hardly hear anyone bring this up anymore. And this is part of what makes Denshattack so special, because when I say the team did their homework, I don't just mean they get trivia about ramen and sushi right. They also meticulously capture the fiery and, dare I say, rebellious spirit of Japanese people that is backed up by actual history and not just tropes you see in manga. And I bring up the 1950s because the immediate fallout of Japan's surrender and the civil unrest that followed can be compared to the setting of Denshattack, albeit loosely, and mimics how citizens dealt with the repercussions. Aside from all the flying trains, of course. Despite this, the story goes out of its way to emphasize that it takes place in the future and muses that this is the road we're heading down. You all know the quote. Yet, strangely enough, as applicable as Denshattack's themes are to the current state of the world, they weren't supposed to be this applicable. You see, in an article by Rock Paper Shotgun, the game's directors David Juan Mondru and Angel Beltran admit that the highly topical themes came about accidentally when they chose the aesthetics they did. The game was much more relevant 2 or 3 years after its release, Juan Mondru notes. Sometimes you get a thought or an idea and you extend it to the worst way possible, that you think it even looks like a parody, and 3 years later, unfortunately, that becomes the case. It speaks to how deeply entwined with advocacy these subcultures are that a game about cool Japanese gangs from the past would have so much relevancy in 2026. Undercoders were working on Denshattack before AI was a hot button issue, but somewhere down the line billionaire tech pros just made an unspoken bet to see who could make the planet uninhabitable first. But beyond that, this omission is actually proof that these quintessentially Japanese movements have their roots in opposition to powerful entities carelessly harming people and the world at large. That sentiment is timeless and not limited to any one issue or country. Let's talk about these subcultures in more detail and you'll see what I mean. Because I'm biased, I'm gonna start with the movement that rose furthest along the timeline, Gyaru. Although this style can be traced back as far as the 1980s, it would see its peak in popularity and cultural impact around the 90s and early 2000s. Following Japan's inflation crisis, young girls from private schools whose families had accumulated wealth would embrace their financial stability by dyeing their hair light colors, buying luxury brands, and throwing parties almost daily. Naturally, teenagers enjoying their youth would spark moral panic among Japanese adults, which was only exacerbated by tabloid magazines exploiting the mania. They would even feloniously try to link the Gyaru craze with the rise of teen prostitution despite a lack of evidence, and unfortunately that label of immorality would go on to remain associated with the aesthetic. In Denshattack, Yoshie is depicted as a wealthy high school dropout whose parents not only disowned her, but the government even banished her from society due to her out-of-control parties, spending sprees, and, quote, fearing her influence could lead the youth to revolt. Yoshie is one of the more harmless Denshattackers you encounter in the game, and true to the real-life Gyaru's, paranoia is ultimately what led to her being made an outcast. It was the adults surrounding her who tried to box her in and failed to understand her frustrations that led to her revolting, as is often the case with teenagers who act out. On the opposite end of that spectrum, we have Madoka, who is based on the Sukeban subculture, which goes way back to the 1960s and early 70s. After World War II ended, it wasn't just adults expressing their discontent. The youth would get in on the chaos as juvenile crime allegedly tripled compared to pre-war statistics. Having lost faith in authority but still looking for guidance, Japanese schoolboys would start to rally together and form gangs with established hierarchies and rules. This would be the start of the Bancho, an all-boys group of troublemakers who bonded through organized fights and petty theft. But I only bring them up because their no girls allowed policy would lead to the rise of the Sukeban, who were just as, if not more, ready to raise hell on civilized society. Being the almost inverse of the Gyaru culture, these girls would actively reject femininity by engaging in unladylike behaviors such as smoking and vandalism. Another notable distinction is how they altered their school uniforms to make their skirts longer, supposedly so they wouldn't be reduced to eye candy for boys and men. But in addition to averting the male gaze, these skirts doubled as a way to hide weapons. This detail is cleverly reflected in Denshattack, as Deadball is known for using traps and exploiting secret passageways during races. Another aspect of the gang was instilling harsh punishments for disloyalty through methods that could qualify as torture, as seen when Madoka forces her gang into the Tower of Endurance for letting Emi intrude on their territory. Madoka's rebellious streak is much more violent than Yoshie's, but follows a similar theme of adults letting her down. Her unresolved anger issues got her booted from a sport she clearly cares a lot about, as she would form her gang's entire motif around it and seemingly still plays baseball with them from time to time. Her search for an outlet would only end after befriending Emi and the others, who slowly but surely get her to open up and be vulnerable after having to keep up a front of toughness. But going into how Japan's subjugation affected men, we have to look at the World War II veterans who would spark the Bosozoku movement represented by Shin and Fumihiko. Now, although this term would be retroactively applied to their real-life inspiration, these two more accurately reflect the Kaminari-zoku movement, or Thunder Tribe biker gang of the 1950s. Having been led to believe they'd die for their country, Japan's surrender came as a shock to former kamikaze pilots who were forced to reintegrate into normal society with little in the way of support. Suffering from trauma and a lack of purpose, they would turn to motorcycles both as a way to recapture the adrenaline they'd gotten used to in war, as well as putting the skills they learned working on military planes to use by souping up their bikes with outrageous upgrades. Their reckless driving and noise pollution would get them labeled as societal problems, but no one seemed to reflect on the actual societal problem that led to their behavior, a militant nation that turned them into killing machines only to discard them once they outlived their usefulness. Fittingly, Shin and Fumihiko were both mechanics who had worked on cars, which would be rendered obsolete following the climate catastrophe. Their skills were no longer needed, and this would result in them being unable to afford visas to the Dome cities. But they luckily found refuge in Denshattack. Fumihiko in particular exhibits something close to PTSD in the sense that he's so shaken by one of his designs getting a man killed that he vowed to never work on a train again. This kind of trauma could be compared to that of a veteran who lost a brother in arms. And this Japanese movement in particular will live on in the form of the modern-day Bosozoku, which is represented by Yamagata and his group. Yamagata most closely resembles the modern image of a Japanese delinquent, and him and his gang will often use their trains to cause havoc for Moraido. The actual Bosozoku similarly get into trouble with the law quite a bit, but how much of it comes down to actually committing crimes is debatable. You see, whereas older men having their lives stolen from them and finding solace through motorcycles was the main theme of the Kaminari Zoku, Bosozoku has a much heavier focus on anti-police sentiment, and we see that in Yamagata's storyline quite a lot.
Get the peg! Let's go off the rails. Officer flooding the place! Alright, let's fail! Break more stuff on your way out! Nara is for the people!
And this, like everything else in this game, was a very deliberate choice. In 2004, the National Police Agency of Japan would be given more freedom to persecute bikers through a revised traffic law. This would allow them to categorize Bosozoku groups as pseudo-yakuza organizations, enabling them to more or less handcuff any biker on sight. Yamagata's run-ins with the police would even bleed into the region after his, as he has familiarity with the head of the task force, Brian. He would even go on to aid Emmy in breaking her friends out of jail when they get captured, because of course this game about doing skate tricks with trains has a prison break storyline that you think it didn't, and he even knows his underlings well enough to use their penchant for gambling and arrogance of their own speed against them before they ultimately face Brian. Tragically, Yamagata also shows Emmy a graveyard of fallen comrades who were killed by Moraido's police, and the ones who didn't die in crashes are implied to be carted off to boarding schools that are actually just prisons. No doubt alluding to how Japan's police crackdown has led to the real-life Bosozoku depleting from almost 42,000 members to less than 8,000 today. But however differently they all express it, these groups all have the same thing in common: their desire to break away from a society that stifles and oppresses them. Their coming together isn't just a heartwarming found family story, it symbolizes the individuality and creativity that transcends all time periods of Japan. Denshattack's lighthearted tone belies a truly deep message of resilience in the face of a world that's seemingly already lost, and it's done through the ideals of a group of people that is often underestimated when it comes to themes like this. This silly game that is essentially just Tony Hawk but What If Train is honestly one of the most well-researched and respectful portrayals of Japanese culture I've ever seen. And this game was made in Spain. Japanese game companies, I don't want to speak for you, but you might want to step it up. You're getting outpaced by the weeps. And we made it to the end. Denshattack really feels like a game that nobody asked for, but in a way that makes you wonder why no one thought to ask up until now. The very concept in and of itself is the ultimate tribute to human creativity, because this game is just too illogically awesome to ever be conceived by AI. Even just recording this video has made me want to play through it again. You know what? Why don't I? Here's my final verdict. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I hope to see you next time.